My name is Paul O'Leary and I teach history at Aberystwyth University. Today the topic of my talk is the British Empire and life at home between 1870 and 1914. What I want to do here is to introduce you to a debate among historians about the impact of empire on life at home. There has been some debate about this with disagreement between people who think that the empire had an enormous impact and those who thought that it had very little. But before we move on to that, I'd like to just set the scene, as it were, and have a look at exactly what kind of thing the British Empire was. The British Empire had been in existence for roughly 3 centuries, but the focus of this lecture is on the high point of empire between roughly 1870 and 1914. And it's this period in particular that the controversy has focused on. You can see on the screen a map that was used in at least some schools during this period, which was meant to create a pride in empire in the way that it coloured in on the map some of the territories that were governed by Britain. India, the Indian subcontinent, is there, as is Australia and New Zealand, South Africa, Canada, and of course during the period we're looking at, much larger parts of Africa would come under the direct control of the British Empire also. So the questions that we're faced with are as follows. Some people clearly did have direct experience of travelling in these territories, whereas most of the people did not. So how did empire affect the lives of those who didn't travel in the empire? As I've suggested, the two interpretations diverge quite significantly between those who say that it affected most aspects of life and those who think it did not. The evidence for these two positions is extensive, and it covers a whole variety of different things. Let's take one example. Boys' magazines and girls' magazines frequently projected a romanticized view of empire. They saw it as a heroic enterprise, exciting, the kind of thing to be looked up to. This is just one example. What I want to do in the rest of this talk is to focus on a particular type of source and to examine that in more detail. What I'm going to look at is advertising and to see to what extent adverts for a whole variety of different products created an awareness of empire and possibly even projected a kind of pride in empire as well. So we'll be looking at questions that revolve around the whole way in which advertising used images of empire. And I think we can ask broader questions about the nature of what advertisers are trying to achieve when they create adverts. To begin with, they usually associate their products with themes or images they think their customers will approve of in order to persuade them to buy the product. The advertisers clearly want to associate their goods with status to make the goods more desirable. That happens today, and it happened in the period we're going to be looking at. So let's look at some examples from the 1890s in particular that show us how empire was used in advertising campaigns and on the products themselves. This example of advertising an everyday product, soap, is a very clear illustration of what we're looking at. The imagery here is trying to associate Queen's honey soap with Queen Victoria. There she is, sitting in the centre. The woman, of course, who was seen as the figurehead of the empire. But if we look around her, we can see people from a whole variety of different backgrounds and cultures that are meant to represent the diversity of the empire. We can see, for example, people from Africa, the Indian subcontinent, and from South Africa, possibly also Australia or New Zealand. The attempt here is clear, linking Queen's honey soap with high status, with Queen Victoria, but also with pride in empire. This wasn't the only product, and we can go through a number of others to make the point even more emphatically. Let's take Huntley and Palmers biscuits. This is a very exotic kind of picture to have on your biscuit tin. Notice that it says just under the title, Huntley and Palmers, manufacturers to the Queen. So there's that connection with high status again. But the picture here is depicting a very specific kind of incident. In this picture, we're in the Indian subcontinent, and a group of European men have been out on a tiger hunt. That is, riding the elephants, and they've stopped here for afternoon tea. And the implication of the picture is that with their tea in India, they sat down and ate their Huntley and Palmers biscuits. A number of questions arise from this. There is a clear assumption that the people buying these products knew what this picture meant, that they were able to decode it. And that perhaps also tells us something about the expectations of the manufacturers. Other products used slightly different images related to empire. Here we have Colmans Mustard. And this was linked to empire in a slightly different way. The image is of the Royal Navy and a naval officer. And of course the Royal Navy was essential to the maintenance of the empire across the globe. Without it, a small island like Britain would be incapable of maintaining this kind of imperial presence. And we can show even more remarkable examples, such as this one, a product remarkably called Colonial Crackers, and this is a much more political one. The figure in the centre of it was Joseph Chamberlain, and he was the government minister responsible for the colonies. And in this case, the producers of these biscuits, Badger and Company, were projecting a political message as well. This one is entitled One Flag, One Empire. So we can see how a variety of products identified empire as a crucial aspect of their packaging and of their advertising campaign. That political dimension to it reminds us that advertising was used on specific types of occasion during the South African or Boer War of 1899 to 1902. To take one example, Bovril projected an image of soldiers at the front drinking Bovril and in fact using it to restore them after being injured. Bovril is liquid life, it says. And in fact, the Boer War was a turning point in attitudes to empire. After the Boer War, a whole series of initiatives were made to try to inculcate ideas of imperialism in children. Empire Day was celebrated in many schools on the 24th of May from 1902 onwards. And as you can see in the picture here, it was intended to involve saluting the flag and a whole series of other activities related to empire. This was an emulation of what had begun in Canada, where Empire Day had taken root and then spread throughout the empire afterwards. In Britain, the person who proposed this was the 12th Earl of Meath, who you can see on the screen. So what I've done in this lecture today is simply used one particular type of source, that is advertising, to show us how empire was part of consumer culture. The debates I mentioned at the beginning are obviously part of a much wider analysis of how empire affected British life during this period. But this has given you a taster of the kind of evidence that is used by historians to try to analyse this particular question. Thank you. Diolch.